Everybody. I want to talk a little bit about the new CDC study that got released that talked about schools reopening. I think it's important to kind of put in perspective and read beyond the headline for that. So first of all, understand our school is open, okay? When it says reopen schools, or when the government says reopen schools, or Cuomo or the CDC, understand our school is open. We have in-person learning every day, well, most days except for all of those quarantines, right? But we do have in-person learning. There are many schools around the country that have no in-person learning. And so that's what those headlines are really geared towards. And so unfortunately, though, our parents are going to read the headline and they're going to assume that that study says reopen fully. And that's not what it says. And that's not what they studied, and it's not what they mean. And I think it's important that we have that information kind of at our disposal. So first off, just a little bit about the study. They studied a rural community in Wisconsin. And what they found is that in that community, the schools were on a hybrid model. They had two cohorts, similar to how we have here in Mahopac. They had masks and social distancing, both similar to what we have here in Mahopac. In fact, they did double masking in these schools in Wisconsin. So that's a little bit deeper than we had. When they followed them, they did it from August through November, the end of August through the end of November, through Thanksgiving. They found 92% mask compliance, which is quite high. And they found that there was still cases in the school, but that the spread was lower than the overall community. So it ended up being about 3,400 and change per 100,000 in the school community, and it was about 5,300 and change in the overall community. So by that stat, yes, school is safer than the community as far as spread. But the real reason for that, which is below the headlines of this type of article, is that the precautions were in place and the guidelines were in place. So it would be foolish to take that study and say, oh, look, we can open schools fully. We can reduce distancing from 6 feet to 3 feet. We can get rid of masks, whatever you're going to say. Because really what the study proves is that if you follow the precautions like we have been following here in Mahopac, the school is safer or has less transmission than the overall community where those precautions aren't always followed. It does not mean that the school is safe, right? No one is guaranteeing that. It does not mean that you can remove precautions, shrink down the distances, wear less masks. None of that says. So I think there's this real misperception out there about what it says, because if you look at the headlines are about opening schools, and immediately everyone that wants schools fully open grabs that and says, that's right, reopen the schools. And that's not really what the study says. That's not what the data says. In fact, if you continue to read the exact same study, it recommends that restaurants in communities close. And so you have the same people that would be arguing for schools to fully reopen that are going to use this study, but then they want to ignore the rest of the study that says in order to tame down community transmission, restaurants should be takeout only. And so again, it is about reading the entire thing. It is about going through the actual study and the data and understanding the school that they looked at. And again, a very rural school, very spread out. And so I think it's important that, because we will likely hear this and we will likely face this, that you have some talking points at your disposal in case you end up in a conversation about that. And again, we can't cherry pick the study, right? We can't say yes to schools and no, we'll ignore the part about restaurants and whatnot. We have to take the whole study for what the study is worth. And again, what the study says is that what we're doing reduces the risk of transmission in schools, right? And what it's really recommending is that the rest of the schools try this model, right? The ones that have been remote only. And so remember, our schools are open. So when you hear reopen schools, that's not us. We're open, all right? In fact, most of New York State, the vast majority is open. So again, that's important because I think people are taking that and running with that, and that's not really what the intent was. And certainly that study does not say open schools fully without these precautions, without distancing and masks and whatnot in place. I also want to make you aware that the Putnam County superintendents, as well as the Putnam County politicians, the county executive Mary Ellen Odell, and the DOH have faced tremendous pressure from parents in this area to follow the Westchester model that I sent out a couple of weeks ago as far as contact tracing. I have good news to report in that the Putnam County superintendents are united, as well as the DOH, and in fact, a statement will be coming shortly from Mary Ellen Odell that Putnam County has no intention to change its current practices or guidelines with regards to schools in the near future. And so if you look at what happened to Westchester, honestly, it's really a big mistake and a giant misunderstanding. And Putnam County is not following them down that terrible rabbit hole. And that will be announced publicly in the coming days. So I think that's important to understand that, at least for right now, things are going to operate the way that we've really been operating the entire school year. And obviously, there's a hope that with vaccinations and hopefully a reduced rate, as again, we start to get out of winter, which obviously is still going to be another month or two, that we may be able to get some type of relief on the restrictions and perhaps get students full in Memorial Day and later or something like that. But for right now, there is no intention of changing the current restrictions and guidelines that we have in place for schools. Okay. Couple of other notes, though, for this week. Again, we have in the bulletin 2 MOAs that were approved. One is in regards to the role of nurses in if we ever end up COVID testing, although that seems to be out of the realm of possibilities now, with Governor Cuomo announcing the elimination of orange zones and only leaving 5 yellow zones, primarily 4 out of the 5 in New York City and then the 5th one in Newburgh. So it does not seem like we would be adding any more zones. It seems like we're actually lessening restrictions here in New York. And the second one has a whole bunch of things, including a couple of new ASOP codes for people that are working from home. It's just a good way for the district to be able to figure out why people aren't in the building and who is not in the building each day. And then also APPR, so there's some changes in there. Please read through that. I'm sure it was gone over in the building meetings as well, as far as how the unannounced observations will be done, as well as having the choice to have your announced observations be virtual. And then finally, it also has a driver's ed component because of the rate having to be renegotiated in that, because we've reduced the tuition. So that's in there as well. There's also a couple of other really important things to take a look at. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you next week.